Ambassador, when did it happen?
When did what happen?
Remember when the media provided the blow-by-blow of the presidential impeachment?
You don't know who was in the meeting?
Which meeting are you referring to?
The meeting that never happened. Who was in it?
Seems so long ago. It's really been just a couple of months. And for many, so tiring, they got what's being called news fatigue.
Like an HR meeting convened in hell, the whole Ukraine impeachment saga.
People tuning out. Now with COVID-19, news consumption is way up.
I have, hundreds of millions of people, number one on Facebook. Did you know I was number one on Facebook?
The news channels getting big ratings. So I talked to Elisa Shear of Pew Research Center, a Washington, D.C. think tank considering the media in this time of crisis.
Yeah, the coronavirus outbreak is sort of an unprecedented news event, at least compared to what we've seen recently. So 57% of Americans say that they're following the outbreak very closely.
Senators, how say you?
That's well more than double the number in February when, according to Pew Research, just 24% were following the news closely back in the impeachment days.
Not guilty.
Pew also monitors news consumers by age group.
Another familiar pattern that we see is that young people are actually following news about the coronavirus a little bit less. So 42% of those 18 to 29 are saying that they're following it very closely compared to 69% of those 65 and older. Again, that's something we see with a lot of different news topics.
How have we seen, I guess, news fatigue kind of go up and down as we've cycled through massive events, whether it was
Yes or no?
Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, whether it was any kind of military intervention around the world? What have we seen in terms of patterning of up and down, of people going into the news and then pulling back out?
So in 2016, we asked people, this is sort of the first time we asked about the idea of maybe people are worn out by the news, and about 60% of people said specifically news about the 2016 election, that they were kind of worn out by the amount of news there is. We asked a similar question more generally in 2018 and 2019, and really large numbers in both years, even though in 2018 there wasn't a presidential election going on. About 2/3 of U.S. adults in both of those years said that they were worn out by the amount of news there is these days.
Has there been kind of any criticism the way the media has covered this at all?
Actually, we asked how people thought the media in general were covering the coronavirus, and 70% said that they were doing at least somewhat well. And then those numbers are even higher when you ask people how they think their own sources are covering the coronavirus. So 80% of people, kind of mostly regardless of what source they're turning to, whether it's Fox News or the New York Times or MSNBC, say that their own news sources are covering the outbreak very or somewhat well.
So there's a loyalty to the source and they're sticking with it no matter what.
Yeah, definitely. One of the interesting things that we see is even though people are giving their media sources high ratings overall, there is a difference in the details that they're taking away from that coverage. So the perceptions of the virus can differ depending on which source people are turning to.
And now it's coronavirus.
Pew's latest inquiry into viewers' perceptions looks at the origin of the COVID-19 virus. Did it really come about naturally in a food market in Wuhan, China?
But there is also speculation that perhaps it did not originate there. Tell us what you know.
Pew found 37% of Fox News watchers believed COVID-19 came about naturally, which is true according to public health officials, while almost as many, 31%, thought it was created intentionally. Decidedly not true, although it was a theory discussed on that channel.
But we do know that we have to get to the bottom of that.
Over at MSNBC, 66%, almost twice as many, believe the virus occurred naturally.
What do you think in terms of you guys doing your questioning in the months to come, what this might mean big picture for news fatigue going into the election or coverage of this right now?
Yeah, so interest in coronavirus news is about twice as high or a little bit more than interest in, for example, news in the 2020 election that we saw in February. So it's definitely top of mind for people, and it will likely continue to be top of mind for people for quite some time. It makes sense that the interest is so high because we asked people if they were being affected by the coronavirus outbreak, and almost 9 in 10 of members of both parties said that their lives were being impacted. So this is kind of a bipartisan effect on people's lives.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how those numbers play out and the work that you guys continue to do. Elisa Shearer, thank you so much from the Pew Research Center for joining me, talking a little bit about our news coverage, news fatigue, and where we go from here. Be well, okay?
Thank you too, Christy.